All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and as you're coming in, I'd love to hear from folks where you're coming in from. Go ahead and drop that into the chat if you're willing to do that. Would appreciate that. My name is Tim Alberg. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Your Financial Pharmacist. Zoe, thank you, calling in from LA. Really excited to have a special guest here this evening. Julia Myers. I'm going to turn it over to her as our expert here for this evening tonight to really be talking about a topic that we believe is so important to the financial plan. One that I think is really one that we overlook a lot. Not just this concept of teaching our kids about money, teaching the next generation, but how do we make sure that we really understand our money mindset, our money scripts, our money classroom? And I love the focus that Julia brings to the behavioral aspect of this topic because as we'll talk about here this evening, before we're able to really talk about how can we effectively transition and talk to the next generation about money. I know this is near and dear to my heart. I've got four boys, 4 to 12, something we're constantly talking about in the household. I really have to do a check of, hey, what are my money scripts? What are our money scripts as a family? And how are we approaching this topic? And I know for me and for Jess, very much how we were brought up influences the topic here and how we approach this with our kids. Julia is going to talk a lot more about that. Let me briefly introduce Julia, and then we'll get into some logistics, and I'll turn it over to her. Dr. Julia Myers is a sought-after speaker, founder of Generational Wisdom, leading expert on how to talk to kids about money. As a keynote speaker, Julia has empowered hundreds of wealthy families to transform their money mindset and regain control over their generational wealth. She's spoken at several large events, including the White Coat Investor Conference and the DLP Elite and Prosperity Retreat, to name a few. A gifted presenter, Julia has led countless panels, moderated well-attended events, hosted national webinars where she's inspired participants with actionable takeaways and memorable storytelling. Julia believes that every experience can be a lesson with the right perspective. As a doctor of pharmacy with an MBA in healthcare administration and 15 years of corporate and clinical experience, Julia is also the quintessential working mom. As a mom to 5 children, so we've got some wisdom here to share. 5 children living at home, Julia is intimately familiar with the pressures facing parents today. She's rapidly become the national expert in helping wealthy families navigate entitlement. So, Julia, before we get too deep into this, I'm curious, tell those that are attending here live tonight or those that are watching the recording as well, what was really your why, your motivation into this journey of the work that you're doing at Generational Wisdom and the work that you're doing as it relates to teaching parents, teaching kids about money? Why is this a passion project for you?
Thanks so much, Tim, and thanks everybody for joining. And for me, it's about the phrase, it's for the kids. It's for the kids. What we do is you work hard so you can retire. Why? For the kids. And then I really started thinking, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? And how do I live that out? And so sitting around the table one night when one of the kids said, "Are we rich?" That got me thinking, I think I need to do a better job talking about money with my kids.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that. And you're going to share some of your experiences, and you've got kids at kind of that next phase from me. So I feel like I always take away something for you. I'm excited to learn alongside the others that are here this evening. Julie, if you want to advance to the next slide, I'll talk through some logistics and then turn it over to you for the meat of the presentation here this evening. For those of you that aren't familiar about who we are, what we do at Your Financial Pharmacist, we help pharmacists at all stages of their career on their path towards achieving financial freedom. And I just had the chance to come back from the American Pharmacists Association meeting this past weekend in Orlando, got to talk with pharmacists all across the country. And it was such a great reminder of the mission and work that we're doing, that everyone is on their own journey. I got to talk with new practitioners that were overwhelmed and working through student loan debt, finishing up residency. I got to talk with pharmacists that were nearing retirement and thinking about that transition, and certainly pharmacists that are in this phase that we're talking about here, teaching kids about money. So if you're not familiar with what we do already, all of the information of our resources, of our blog, our podcasts. We do one-on-one planning on the financial side as well as the tax side. You can learn more about all that at yourfinancialpharmacist.com. Go ahead to the next slide, Julia. So again, you can really engage with information in a variety of ways. We've got a library of free resources on a variety of topics. This actually being one that we don't have a ton on, so I'm excited to add to that library here this evening. Again, you can access those resources for free on the podcast, on the blog, on the website. And again, for those that are interested more in that one-on-one relationship, we've got a team of certified financial planners, and we also have a tax team. It is tax season right now for those that want to navigate that and to have someone in their corner helping alongside of them. Go ahead to the next slide. So an important disclaimer, anytime we're talking about any topic really related to the financial plan, it's important that we remind that this really is meant to be informational in nature. It's meant to be educational, hopefully on some level inspirational. This is not meant to be advice. I think that's going to be pretty clear here this evening. Sometimes when we're talking about investments or other parts of the plan, that might muddy the waters a little bit more, but really important. One of the things that I say often on the podcast, for those of you that are familiar with the podcast, is that we really want to be looking at the financial plan in its entirety. And sometimes when we look at one individual part of the plan, whether here it's, teaching kids about money, or it's student loan debt or retirement or taxes or whatever, sometimes we can get into those silos. And I really encourage folks to take that step back, whether you're DIYing your financial plan or you're working with a professional, to make sure you're looking at how are all the pieces and parts coming together to make sure that they're jiving and working together. Go ahead to the next slide. We are going to do a giveaway as promised. So for 2 individuals that are here live tonight, we'll come back to this at the very end, so hang with us. We're going to do our best to keep this on time. We'll wrap up around 9:30 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to select one individual that's here live for $50 Amazon gift card. Another individual get our YFP bundle, which includes a YFP t-shirt, as well as some copies of the books that we have published by Your Financial Pharmacist. So hang with us to the very end, and we'll come back to this giveaway. Go ahead to the next slide. All right, so Julia, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you. I will keep an eye on the chat. So please use the chat. I have found that in these types of sessions, I suspect we've got individuals that have young children at home, that have kids they're teaching about money, or perhaps in the future. Share your experiences as well. Julia is going to provide hers. I'm eager to learn as well, but use the chat, ask questions, engage with the material, and we hope to make this as informative as possible. So Julia, the floor is yours, and thank you so much again for taking the time to come tonight.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thanks everybody. So I came from a household that rolled coins at the dinner table. Can you imagine that round wooden table? You're sitting in your kitchen with the heavy chairs, and the weight of the coins is in your hands. Like, you can smell money. And maybe that's a really gross smell now, but I loved counting coins with my dad, rolling them, putting them in. And those are some of the first memories I have of money. Also, some of the first memories of me counting, which probably means I was going to grow up to be a pharmacist someday. But since I don't count anymore, I'm the mom of 5. My youngest is 8 years old now, so in 2nd grade, and in our blended family, our oldest turns 21 this month and is actually in London on spring break. So we've got a little bit of everything going on in our house. And what I've found is that thinking about money and their beliefs actually start at your childhood. So going back to that table with your parents, going back to those first money conversations, going back to the first time I saw and held a $100 bill. That is like a pivotal moment for me, because that's when I started feeling something about money. It wasn't just that thing that was there. Growing up, all of my needs were met. I didn't have everything I wanted, but all of my needs were met. And for me, touching that $100 bill after my senior graduation, it pulled on these heartstrings of these feelings of, this is really pretty cool. I felt abundance. I felt wealth. I felt like this is amazing. And then when I spent that $100 bill and it broke into all the smaller dollars and change and in coins, it was the other side of money. It was I want more of it, but not because I want that feeling back. And so I want some of us to think back to maybe those first feelings of money. And that's where we're going to go tonight, because understanding how we deal with money really deals with how we feel about money. So tonight we're going to talk about the financial influences affecting our money mindset. We're going to talk about not only how your relationship with money shows up with you, shows up in your marriage or your partnership, it also shows up in your family finances. And then your extended family finances. Tim and I have talked a little bit about extended family makes things really complicated, especially when it comes to money. And I think at the end, the biggest thing I want you to take away is, what's your strongest money influence and what are you going to do about it? That's where we're going to go tonight.
Julia, can I
So I'd
share
like to, yeah, go ahead.
your $100 bill made me think of my oldest son, Samuel. Over the holidays, he had a chance, he's 12, he had a chance to do a piano gig through his local music teacher. And it was clearly a wealthier family that was bringing in, younger students to play piano, and they handed him a $100 bill, right? And he still has it. And, what's interesting is it really made me realize generationally, for how little they handle cash, right? You talked about your experience rolling coins. I can think about I can see the envelopes in my kitchen. I can feel the allowance. my parents gave me. I can see the envelopes of the Save, Spend, Give. That is largely gone, right? Because of tools and apps, there's lots of different things that are available. And that really struck me that for him and for my boys, like that feeling of cash, that physical sensation is just very different. And it led to some really interesting conversations around, wow, I've never seen $100 bill. And, he doesn't want to spend it. So then we talk a little bit about, well, if you hold on to it for too long, there's things like inflation, right? And what are some opportunities? But that idea that like, I'm going to go take that $100 and put it in a bank and I can know, like, I'm going to give somebody my physical $100 and I can't see it anymore. It's just a really interesting concept that generationally, I think as we've gotten obviously more towards utilization of online tools, apps, credit cards, debit cards, et cetera, we can remember, your story really resonated with me, those experiences growing up, the smell of the coins, the smell of the dollar bills. But I think there's some different maybe challenges and opportunities generationally when we think about teaching younger kids about money today. So your story resonated with me. I just want to share that one as well.
Absolutely. And I self-identify as a millennial, and I want to know who else is with us in the audience tonight.
Let me get up the poll here. So we've got a poll here to help. I know somebody put in the chat. Thank you, Zoe, as well. So what generation were you born? I too self-identify as a millennial. Boomer is a Gen X. You should see the poll there up on your screen. Mia representing the millennials as well. We'll give folks here just a minute to answer the poll up on your screen. So are you Boomer, Gen X, Millennial, Gen Z? I think this will also help guide Julia as we go throughout the session, just to know who's in the room, right? Who's in the room, who's here attending this evening. All right, let's just wait a few more seconds and then I'll share these
Knowing
back out.
the timeline for training to be a pharmacist makes this kind of a trick question. But I will say that what's not on the poll question is the next generation. So 2012 to 2022 is what researchers are calling Generation Alpha or Gen Alpha. And then anybody born 2022 or later, they don't have a name for it yet. So that is so fascinating that we went from a 20-year generation to now less than 10 years.
Yeah, that is interesting.
So buckle up your seats, parents.
All right, so Julia, it looks like we've got about half that are millennial Gen Y, a little less than half that are Gen X, and then about 10% that are Gen Z. So there we have it.
Excellent. Well, this will make my family chat need a new name because in our household with the teenagers that have cell phones, our family chat is called the Boomers. And so I think we need to change that. I do think that the influences that are in your life shape your beliefs, and then your beliefs shape your mindset. So when I looked at that $100 bill, my influences were from my parents that went to a community college, and my mom was a dental hygienist and had worked and scraped and saved for everything they had. And so I believe that that $100 bill was my ticket kind of to freedom. And so my mindset followed. How do I get more $100 bills? Not because I want paper, but because I want that feeling. So where we're going to go tonight is talk about where's the first place that you want to start? It's at the beginning. So I think of an analogy of a tree, but it starts with the seed. It starts with the roots. It doesn't really have much say in what nurtures it. It doesn't really have much say in where it plants its ground, but it's going to thrive. It's going to make it. So I want everyone to kind of reflect, and individually, if this is never something you've talked about with your partner, this is a great place to start. What are your first memories about money? But more importantly, what were your first feelings about money? Because often memories carry feelings. Memories may be about facts, but if your parents remember the Christmas present you got, they remember that it was really expensive, but you remember that the box was really cool. So I think that your first memories about money are often your first feelings about money. And if we were to categorize it, because we're pharmacists, right? We want to label things. I like to put things into really 4 buckets. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the generation you're in. So fellow millennials, we're the majority tonight, but I don't want to exclude Gen X or Gen Z. I will talk a little bit about family, knowing that everybody's definition of family is a little bit different. So think of those people that tucked you in at night. Think of those people that you grew up with in your close community. That's what I'm going to call family. When I think about social influences on money, I think a lot about the things you touch, the things you feel, the things you interact with, often socioeconomic influences, what you see and what you touch. And then cultural is maybe a little bit more far-fetched, but we'll get into that a little bit later as it relates to those just things around you that you just don't realize. The fish that's in the fishbowl doesn't realize he's in a fishbowl until he's out of the water. So those are going to be the cultural things we talk about. So for me as a millennial, I remember handling money. I remember when I got my first email address. Now, kids today need an email address to open a bank account online and never have to leave their home. So I think that money influences can be very different based on your generation. That also includes some of the values and the value judgments or the value assumptions that come with your generation. When I think of social, I think of the suburban household that I grew up in the Midwest. I didn't know that there were people that lived in trailers. I didn't know that there were people that lived in high-rise condos. Like that was just the money influence that I had. And I knew that my house looked just like everybody else's house. I went to a private school that was a Catholic school, and I knew that everybody wore the same uniform and didn't think much of it. Um, and so that was my family influence. That was quite strong. When I think of the vehicles we drove, my dad was always point A to point B. Don't look at what anybody else's car was. To this day, I still can't name cars on the road because that was a money influence that I had growing up, and it's just never really been that important to me. And when we think of cultural, I think of that path of education. I think that path of career. I think going to college, getting a job, being at the same place until you're 65 was the vision my parents had for me. And that's what I did. I kind of went through and checked the boxes. You go to pharmacy school and you get married and then you buy a house and then what? Then you realize, okay, now these money influences that are showing up in my childhood are now affecting me differently as an adult. Tim, what do you want to add? What are your kind of money influences? What do you think of when you think of those sorts of things?
Yeah, I
How
was
much
just
you want to share?
sharing with the group of as you were talking, Julia, and I'm hearing this for the first time, which is fun. But as you were talking, I had this rush of memories coming to me. I shared one of them before of I remember our kitchen table. I can see it, I can feel it as we're talking. I can see the envelopes, save, spend, give. You know, we had the three envelopes for our allowance. And I remember my mom at the bottom of our stairs in our basement were her envelopes, her physical envelopes. And I can directly see the tie to some of the habits that I employed, both I will say good and bad. You know, I think that system really helped me define some of the behaviors I have of, you know, bucketing money and frugality, but I also have had to learn like there's a balance to the frugality as well. And my mom would be the first to admit that like she can be frugal to the point of not enjoying experiences. And so it's interesting as you were talking, I was thinking about, wow, I'm so grateful for all the things, also realizing that I've had to kind of loosen some of those reins to find that balance, as we often say, hey, we've got to take care of our future selves, but we also have to live a rich life today. So, and then I was just having some fun memories of we used to walk up to the local, it's called Dizzy Dean's. It was a local card shop candy store, and it was our spend money that we'd walk up, we'd get cards, we'd get candy. And that was the portion that we were able to kind of, you know, do whatever with. So, and then when you shared about the setting up a bank account, I remember going into the bank, physically walking in the bank. I can see the debit card. It was Alden State Bank. It was a local community bank, and how big of a deal that was to get that checkbook, to get that debit card. So, yeah, great prompts here to think about the influences.
Awesome. And I will also say that everyone's childhood financial influences vary quite a bit. There may be first generation American citizens on our call tonight, and there may be people that grew up in scarcity, in significant poverty. And so I want to honor and hold space for everyone that has all these different influences. I will also say that as a child, you're a seed that was planted wherever you were planted. You didn't get to kind of pick up your roots and decide where you were going to be. So that's why that line is really dark from family, most likely your parents, because that identifies the real heavy influence on your financial beliefs, especially as a child. And some of the things that you might see around you might have some influence, but maybe aren't as significant. So we talked a little bit about technology. We talked about some world events. We talked about entertainment and housing, education, travel. All of those things filter into our beliefs. I will say that the type of the financial influences are always going to be constant. Those four buckets in the research that I've done and in the audiences that I've shared with, everyone I can identify or resonate with the four buckets, but how they are expressed is very, very different. So some magic wand happened when we all turned 18 or we graduated from high school, college, pharmacy school, and all of a sudden, those influences are now our backbone. And now is when we get the freedom to up-level our mindset and kind of decide we now have competing influences. We now have competing attention, and we are now our own backbone. So individually, in addition to the technology, in addition to, world events, we now have wealth transfer. We're thinking about our adult parents, and we're thinking about the next generation. We're thinking about our own retirement and the futures of our kids. We're thinking about the traditions we grew up with and rolling coins. And now my kids like play digital games on their iPads with this is what a penny is and this is what a coin is. They'll never know how fun it is to find a wheat penny, right? When I think of social, I think of as an adult, employment is such a financial influence, especially as a pharmacist. It can be a blessing, it can be a curse, it can be all those things. It can be an empty, fulfilled promise, or it can be the best thing that you found. I think of transportation. How you get around matters when you're an adult. Point A to point B might be less cool than what your neighbors have. I will also say that your recreation, your toys get bigger. Your tools get bigger, your she sheds, your he sheds, and your housing. And all of those things all of a sudden have way more of an influence. When I shift over to cultural, I'm thinking about just lifestyle, your ability to go into debt and borrow money. Kids can't really go into debt, not legally. And I think of social media. I think of as an adult and for the next generation, when we grew up, we saw our next door neighbor's home. It was probably very similar to ours. Now we see social media and we can see a McMansion. And we know that it's real because we saw it on social media. And our kids know that the next Tesla with the cars, the doors that go like this, they know they exist, not because they saw them in their school's parking lot, but because they saw the TikTok or the YouTube video. So as an adult, all of these financial influences are now pressing in on us and on our backbone that says, what do we believe and why do we believe it? What do we keep coming in from our family? Oh, wait, we added a spouse or a partner and in-laws and maybe ex-laws and maybe more kids and all of those things. So now we have all these influences kind of leading us toward why do we believe what we believe?
Julia, I have a half-baked thought that I'm curious to get your input on. Um, One of the things I observe, and I feel this myself, is that sometimes we fall into an identity script that, for better or for worse, kind of puts us in a box. So I see this a lot with pharmacists where, when we were in school, I graduated in 2008. When I was in school, the story was very much of like, hey, you're going to make a great income. Don't worry about it, right? Don't worry about the debt. Don't worry about X, Y, or Z. And so we kind of, for better or worse, we set these artificial ceilings of, yes, that's a great income, but also of what's possible. And we kind of put ourselves in this, I don't know if you call it upper middle class box, right? Um, what are your thoughts there? Like, where would that fall in what you just shared of kind of these identities that we form? I see this a lot with pharmacists where, because I'm a pharmacist, because I graduated, I'm going to now do X, Y, and Z. My colleagues are doing X, Y, Z. This is my peer group that's doing X, Y, Z. Like that close circle professional identity influence. Where would you put that?
I think it feeds from growing up. We were asked, what do you want to do when you grow up?
Mm,
And that was the question every single one of us could answer. I want to be I want to do blank. And then, well, what are you going to school for? I want to be a pharmacist. I'm going to pharmacy school. And so I think that has been ingrained in us. And so as we think about our mindset and we focus in between or shift between social and cultural, that's all we know. Until you're shown something different, until you're shown that there's a way to live debt free, as Dave Ramsey sometimes teaches us, or until there's a way to show you that you can do a side hustle or you can be financially independent and retire early. I don't know that you would know to think any differently. I think of The Wizard of Oz, and when it's black and white, you just didn't know that there was color until you saw it. And that's maybe the most powerful part of mindset is once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you see that this is your backbone, you now have a say and you now have a voice into what your beliefs are. And more importantly, as a parent, you're now going to be the source of your kids' first money memories. You're now going to be the source of your kids' energy, mindset, feelings about money, because naturally, that's the strongest bond when you're a kid.
Yeah, and it's so obvious, but you're even helping me connect the dots. Like when I think about how strong my memories are from growing up, good and bad, it's that humbling realization of like, wow, everything my kids are learning about money and their ingrained behaviors, their money scripts, their money behaviors, good and bad, right? I am teaching them those things and seeing what's, possible. And then the other thought that was coming up for me is, just being aware of like who is your circle of money influence? Like who is having an influence on your mindset, right? So like Julia, we've had a handful of conversations, and like as you and I talk, it's like, oh wow, you have me thinking differently. You have me thinking about this, or I might talk with another business owner or somebody who's outside of pharmacy, somebody inside pharmacy, and even if those aren't the past, or I'm gonna say I'm gonna go do exactly what Julia's doing or exactly what somebody else is doing, it helps me see more color and less of the black and white of, sometimes the world becomes smaller and smaller, and really just seeing what are those other options, what are other people doing, and again, I think that just adds to some of the creativity of the financial plan. So yeah, great stuff.
And I think, Tim, in your work, you can probably speak to the different variety of financial plans. We talk a lot about, I want to retire someday, or I want to have enough money not to worry. And then probably the next question people ask you is, well, how much money do I need?
How much do I
You,
need? Yeah.
Tim, tell me how much money I need to
Hmm.
then retire. And what my work is on is really that mindset of how much do you want? What do you want it to look like? What do you want it to feel like? What are your needs? What are your wants?
Yeah.
And then live that way, knowing that that is going to be extremely different than our physician colleagues, than our non-healthcare colleagues, than our digital nomads that travel the world.
Mhm.
Everything is possible, especially in the world that we're in today.
Yeah, and are we even sure we're climbing the right ladder? Right? Like this is something that I often challenge myself on and challenge others on. Like sometimes it's easy to, ask the question of, hey, I want to retire early because I heard it was inspiring. I see somebody else do it. How much do I need? Or, I feel like I need 3 or 4 or 5 million, whatever the number is, doesn't matter for the sake of this conversation. But we spend a lot of time really trying to get to like, what does Julia actually want? Like, what does Tim actually want? And there's no right or wrong answer to that. Like, at the end of the day, like if we can really define like what are the core values of our financial plan, what are we trying to achieve, knowing that money is ultimately a tool that we're able to, for some people it's experience based, for other people it's giving, for other people it's having time and options. There's a whole host of reasons and a combination of those. But if we can get clear on the vision, okay, then we can start climbing the ladder, or I like to say, it looks more like a rock wall. Sometimes we go left, right, up, down. Like we got to be flexible, but sometimes we start climbing a ladder because other people are climbing the ladder, and it's like, are we actually climbing a ladder that we want to be climbing? And I think that that's so important. Simon Sinek talks about this in his book, Start with Why. Like before we get to the how or what, like are we clear on why we're doing what we're doing? Because if we can work from the why, we can then start to figure out the how and the what. But we so often focus on the how and the what without really being clear on the why. And I think the same is true here when we talk about the financial plan.
Absolutely. I'll have you pull up the poll because I want to
Yes.
know what the audience thinks. After we've unpacked some of these, you've had some time to reflect. For you right now, as an adult, what do you think is the strongest influence on your financial beliefs? And no, I did not give you a D, none of the above, because this is not your PCAT or your boards. You have to answer with a question or with a with a response.
All right. So poll is up. Is it generation? Is it family? Is it social? Is it cultural? We'll give folks here just another minute or so to put their response in. Keyword here, strongest influence. Strongest influence. All right, here we go. Let's see what we got here. we have about 65% that said family, and then pretty evenly distributed
Mhm.
across the other three: generational, social, and cultural.
Awesome. Awesome. And I would bet that this group is just like a lot of the other groups I speak to because that family is still really strong. And often that means that that can be a healthy strong. Doesn't always have to be a negative influence, right? We can talk about positive influences and negative influences. And so that's where we're going to go next. A little bit about, Tim, what you were talking about is starting with that why. And as parents, we heard growing up from our parents, or at least in my house, I heard, I want it to be different for you. I want it to be different for your childhood. Well, guess what, everybody? It's different. It's so different that there are jobs not even created for our kids that are littles right now, that there might not even be degrees for that they go to. So I will just say there's not a playbook for how to navigate this next generation of being both a parent, of still being a child yourself, to adult and aging parents. And so now you're smooshed right in the middle of tumultuous, potentially values, tumultuous modern approaches, the balance between technology. And I would acknowledge that these financial pressures are going to be more visible than they've ever been before because of social media or because of lots of different things, the access we have around the world and to each other. And similar to what our poll is, parents continue to remain the main influence on their children's beliefs. All right, parents, you answered that your family is the largest influence or the strongest influence on your money beliefs. That puts you in the driver's seat now for the next generation. And that's going to feel heavy. That's going to feel scary. But none of us have ever done this before. And that's why we're all here together talking about different ways to brainstorm, different ways to be accountable, different ways to work together. I will say you probably already provided your child's first memories with money. Ask them about it because it may change as they get older. And this is one of my favorite questions to ask the kids is if you had $100 right now, what would you do? Or remember the first $100 you ever received? Do you remember what you did with it? And that can give them that feeling of anticipation and intention and plan, but also remembering, I don't remember what happened to it. And I'm 10 and I should remember what I did with my $100. That's a big amount of money. So your influence as a parent is not to be delegated. So coaches coach, teachers teach, you know, um, church leaders lead, parents, we've got to do our job parenting. And so again, that is the work we're doing tonight, talking about our money mindset, because just like everybody said, we continue to remain the largest, strongest source of our financial influence on our kids. So knowing that we have the backbone, whether we like it or not, it's our backbone and it's our backbone to then pass on to our kiddos. Congrats, we've been elevated to parent. We got this magic badge, right? We got a degree that said we can practice pharmacy, but we have a baby that says now you can practice parenting. So your job as a parent is sometimes I say block and tackle. I'll make a sports analogy. We'll pretend we're not in March Madness and there's not a North Carolina game going on right now. But what do you continue to allow and what do you resist? So of those four buckets, what are those things that you open the floodgates on? Many of you said it's your family, and that's an okay thing. And then maybe you're tampering it down for what do you resist? Everybody's influences and the rate of their influences are going to differ. I will challenge all of you, though, to say the strength of your family tree depends on how you navigate. So that seed that has now grown into a tree, there are uplifting winds that are going to make you reach taller, bigger, wider, produce more fruit, or they're going to be those winds that blow you over or knock you over, or you try and reach and stretch. And so I use visual analogies because I think that that's for us as parents. A tree's never been a tree before, but it just continues to reach and grow. So I will challenge you to find those influences that are uplifting and then try to resist those influences that are negative. And we talked a little bit about feelings, but I want to make this feel a little bit more real. You all have felt them, the pressures, right? I'm going to call those negative influences. I'm just going to label them A little bit of pressure is good, right? A little bit of pressure to have a financial plan, to have your estate in order, to have things in place. That's okay. That's a healthy level of pressure. What's not okay is when you're in a lot of debt because of vehicles and because of payments that we can't sustain. And then our kids are now feeling that pressure too, right? Our kids are feeling us at work and working 12-hour shifts all day long. Do they know why we're at work? Do they know why we're doing what we're doing? And can they articulate the values of the family and say, oh, I value that you're at work because then that means we can spring break or that means we can summer vacation. On the flip side, a lot of those influences, especially those that can come from family or our generation or technology, world events, COVID, has turned out to be a positive influence in our family. It's freed our schedule. We've kind of blown up the calendar of all the activities and all the things to say, what are we going to allow to continue to take up time on our calendar? So I want you guys as an exercise to really take back, talk with your partners, reflect yourself. What are some of those influences that you're allowing? What are some of those influences that you're resisting? And I'll kind of close this out to say, choose those influences wisely, knowing that those headwinds are always going to be coming. The storms are always coming. You don't know when they're coming. But as a parent, your amount of time that you have that influence is like a hourglass. It's going down. And that's scary for us to think about, that it may continue long after we're gone, but it may not. That once they turn 18 or 21 or they move out, they go to London on spring break, like my oldest right now, and they are little adults with their own new backbone. So take this opportunity as a parent, use your gifts, provide those influences, and just know that choosing those influences wisely is going to shape that next generation. Tim, what do you want to add to that as we kind of close up and maybe open up for some Q&A?
Yeah, you have my mind spinning, Julia, and I'm hesitating to say this, which means I need to say it out loud because it's a thought that maybe some others are thinking. When you talk about negative influences, I see a lot of shame. I see a lot of guilt out there around the financial piece. And what was coming up for me is, your comment of some level of that pressure, right, can be positive. It can nudge us to action. It can nudge us to move forward. I think where we see people get paralyzed is in that feelings of shame and those feelings of guilt. And one of the challenges I was going to have for the group is, sometimes it's hard to really objectively evaluate kind of what's going on. And one of the things I observe is, especially when you have two people working on the financial plan together, right? Could be a spouse, significant other, partner. Sometimes I'll observe what I kind of consider like a hyper emotional reaction to like an objective question, right? So, kind of where are we at with X, Y, or Z, right? A very objective question, kind of where are we at with the emergency fund, or where are we at with kind of the plan for the student loan debt, where are we at with saving retirement? And sometimes when I observe like an emotional reaction that seems misaligned with an objective question, that to me is a cue, and no judgment because I've done it myself. That to me is a cue of like, ooh, there's some like history and maybe some trauma, right, that's coming forth that's resulting in kind of a misaligned reaction to a rather objective question, right? And I think you see this a lot with often two people in a relationship, more often than not, it feels like, Julia, people come from very different financial backgrounds. I don't know why that's often the case. But you see a lot of misalignment, right? We work with a lot of couples where one person is, they're in the spreadsheets. They love it. It's energizing. It's captivating. They're getting motivation from being in the spreadsheets, coming up the plan. And the other spouse may be, like, hey, this topic is overwhelming. I'm confused. I'm frustrated. I kind of wish the whole thing would go away. And I'm not suggesting one of those is right or wrong. Obviously, we have to get on the same page and have alignment. But my challenge for the group is, if you notice yourself having what I would call kind of an elevated emotional reaction, whether that's one of, hey, intense feelings of shame or guilt or defensiveness or avoidance can also be a behavior you may see. Just ask yourself, like, hey, what's behind that? Like, approach it with curiosity, not with the shame and the self-judgment, but like, I'm curious, like, what is behind that in terms of why my spouse and I, why my significant other and I, partner and I, like, really got into an elevated, heated battle about this when really, if I look back at the source of it, it really wasn't necessarily the intent. What was the trigger of that? And I think just the more grace you can give yourself and the more curiosity you can approach that, the more willingness you may be to kind of unpack, like, where is that coming from? What is the money script that maybe I had that I adopted as a child that I'm bringing now into my financial plan as an adult? Because the reality is, and Julia, you can speak to this better than I with more experience, like when I think about Jess and I, we came from very different financial backgrounds. We bring our money experiences, right? They are our experiences, and now we're trying to collectively merge together. Of course, that's going to be hard. Of course, that's going to be challenging. And so I think just the more we can say that out loud and give ourselves grace, and I know the limitations of how I grew up financially. I know the limitations of how Jess grew up financially. And I think just the more we can be self-aware and self-assess what are some of those backgrounds and money scripts we're carrying. I think that also not only allows us to give ourselves grace, but also, a partner or significant other grace as we're trying to work on this together.
Absolutely. And knowing that those shared experiences are now going to be a unique experience for your kiddos. So each of the boys is now going to have a different view on money because of that combination of your influences. So I think it is always changing. And therefore, we always need that grace to understand that it's not going to be constant. It's going to be changing. And how are we going to navigate that? What are the tools that we need to kind of navigate? And I think that first step, you hit it on the head, is that awareness. When that emotional threshold, that throttle's kind of coming up, looking in the mirror is step one, which is why we dedicated a whole hour this evening together to think about our mindset, to think about, got to know where you're starting before you can up level, and before you can really be intentional about passing to that next generation as well.
Yeah, and one of the things I've been trying to work on, Julia, is really try to name what that emotion is. So what is that? We can often feel the physical sensation of it, right? I feel the heart rate increasing, I feel, body temperature changing, I feel tense, whatever that might be, everyone's different. But what's the emotion behind that? Is it fear? Is it shame? Is it guilt? On the other side, is it joy? Is it abundance? Is it gratitude? Like, those are equally important. But what actually is that emotion? Because from that, we can become curious of like, oh, like, why do I have fear towards money? Why do I have this avoidance behavior towards money? And you start to peel back the onion, and sure enough, I think, what you'll find is certainly often that comes from how we were raised. Mary just
I'll
shared in the
add
chat,
that. Okay.
Julia. I was just gonna say, Mary shared in the chat. Glad to hear I'm not the only one who has differences in financial opinions with your spouse. Yes, Mary, I can assure you, you are not the only one.
Absolutely. And two kind of ends of that spectrum, Tim, that you hit, you talked about abundance.
Mm,
And earlier you had mentioned kind of that middle class mindset. And I would say there's a lot of scarcity mentality in what I'm going to label, from my perspective, the middle class mindset. It's, how can I hold on to and how can I save as much as I can so I can get out of this job so I can be free? It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that you're living in scarcity. And when we think of wealth and we think of wisdom, we think of an open hand, we think of abundance.
mm,
And so challenging where those feelings come up and saying, if I were in an abundant mindset, how would this feel? How would this show up, or how would I react? If I were in a scarce mindset, how would this feel and how would I react? So understanding where your spouse is coming from and then uniting on, well, where do we want to go together? You now, as the adult, have this backbone. It
mm.
does not dictate where you're going. It just influences the way you think. But remember, we can change the way we think. We can up level our money mindset.
Yeah, I love that, right? We're not defined by this, always. And I think that's such an important reminder of, your comment. And I think just to add on to that, the growth mindset would suggest, sure, if I can recognize and be self-aware, I can now grow, learn, adapt, and evolve, right? What suggestions would you have? This is a big question, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. Like, if someone's listening and saying, hey, I feel myself in that scarcity kind of mindset, I would desire more of that open hand abundance mindset. Like, that's a hard shift, right? Like, what suggestions would you have for someone? Is that, you know, being in community with other people? What would you suggest that you have found helpful in your own journey?
For me, I found when I really step back and come up with something to be thankful for. So gratitude.
Mm,
So everyone here lives in an affluent country, has a advanced doctoral degree of some sort, has Wi-Fi internet, like we all have something to be grateful for. And when you start backing off from that And you can realize, like, I might want a lot of things and once kind of compete with that mindset of, do I have enough? But then when you realize, well, all my needs are met, you could feel abundant with very little. And so it starts with gratitude, and it starts with reflecting and openly sharing and finding that it might be scarcity that you're coming from, but it might also be some other feeling that you mentioned, like fear or doubt or insufficiency, or I should be further because I'm a pharmacist, or
Yeah.
I make six figures and so I should be a millionaire by 40.
Yeah.
Should makes you a should head. Don't do that.
Hmm. I like that. Direct quote, Julia. Yeah. I like that. I think the vulnerability is huge, right? Because, in the scarcity mindset, I see as you're talking about that, I see kind of that isolation. I'm on an island, right? Vulnerability means we're open, we're in communication, we're in community with others. I think that's open to growth, through that vulnerability, I think is huge. I also would add too, and I know this sounds counterintuitive, but my own experience has been, and this has waxed and waned for Jess and I, but our experience has been that when giving is a part of the financial plan, mindset shifts. And, everyone wants to give differently. I'm not here to say how people should or shouldn't give. But I believe that giving, even at a very small level, which hopefully over time can grow, giving as a part of the financial plan, shifts mindset, I believe. Because I think there's start of a shift towards a lack of like control and kind of letting go. And there has to be wisdom in that. I want to make sure people hear that clearly. Like, when someone is facing significant credit card debt and a bunch of student loan debt, right? There's a place in time. But there's a reason why I think even when you look at teaching kids about money and something like the Save, Spend, Give, whether it's 1%, 10%, whatever that number is, it's that idea, right? It's that idea that there's a portion of what I have that I'm willing to open up and give to others. So, again, not here to tell people how they should or shouldn't give, but that's been my own experience.
And
Um,
please do that with your kids as soon as possible.
hmm,
Give money, give time, give effort, give energy, whatever that currency of giving is. Lead by example. They're watching you.
hmm.
If you give and you donate, or if it's putting coins in the bucket or lack of coins in the Salvation Army bell around Christmas time, help them do it. Help them give, help them find that what they have isn't just from you and it isn't just for them to consume, but it's they're just a steward, They were given that money, maybe they earned it, maybe they didn't, but that doesn't mean that they get to keep it all. So
Yeah.
that open hand versus closed fist.
I love the stewardship concept. I think that's such a good way to think about it, right? Manager versus owner. Marcus asked a question, Julia, is it possible to help my children escape financial trouble even after I have failed myself?
Marcus, that's a hard question because I think you know the answer. I think
Mhm.
there's always a chance. I think there's always hope. I think there's always one more step, but I wouldn't equate your ability with how to rescue your kids or rescue yourself with how you define success. You can have a loving relationship with your kids. You can have a loving relationship with yourself. It carries forgiveness, it carries grace. There's a lot of shame, like what Tim was saying about with money. And so I think that it starts with maybe a conversation, but also ownership and accountability of whose problem is it to solve.
Mm,
And sometimes just throwing money at problems doesn't solve the problem. How many times have we heard of professional athletes, mega million contracts, now are broke, lottery winners? Money doesn't solve the problem. There's probably something else a little bit deeper, which means you can help with it because that doesn't mean that you failed before.
I'll let you take this one, Julia, because I'm biased in my answer. So, from
Okay,
Mary,
okay.
question from Mary, when does one critically need a professional financial help? So I think if I'm understanding this right, when might one consider really hiring a professional?
Um, I guess there's two answers to that. It's kind of like, do you like painting your house? Yeah, you can do it. Do you like how it turns out? Do you like the time it takes to do the attention to detail and the cut-ins? I painted once and then I said never again. I did my taxes once and said never again. And what I found though is I enjoy the financial part,
Mm,
but at the same time, I am dedicating my time, energy, and resources into other parts, growing my business, growing my relationships, traveling. And so for me, we just don't touch our financial plan very often. We review it once a year with our CPA and kind of make sure we've got a good tax plan. And we kind of set it and forget it. So I think it's your level of how much influence do you want on your own financial plan? There are plenty of people out there that can help you. And if you don't want to do it, that's okay. If you want to do it, that's okay too. There's a lot of rights. The fact that you're intentionally thinking about how you want your money to work for you, as long as you've got a big cohesive plan, I think that's a great place to start. And then when you've got enough to worry about, you've got enough to have a tax problem or a W-2 problem, ask for help. Fixed fee financial advisors, fixed fee CPAs, get second opinions on things. That's helped us save a lot in taxes and a lot in other parts of our financial plan. So both can be okay. I don't think you need a day one. When you've got $1,000 in an emergency savings account, you don't need a financial planner. But at some point when you're worried, reach out to Tim. He'll take care of you.
Yeah, I would just echo Julia. I believe too, everyone's different. You know, we see people that, you know, they love this topic. They love to learn. They've been very effective DIYers. And we've had some people kind of come to us and, you know, we really ask questions of like, hey, how can we help? And kind of get to the point of like, I don't think there's really a whole lot that we really feel like based on where you're at, what you're doing, we're going to move the needle. Other people that, you know, very much are looking for that accountability partner, very much looking for someone to help further the education, very much looking for someone to kind of help bring all these pieces of the puzzle and put them together. And so, you know, everyone's on their own journey. I would just add for those that do go down that path, you know, I just shared with the group earlier, I got this question on another webinar I was doing. Unlike pharmacists, where, you know, we have a pretty sequential, understood pathway, right? We know what a PharmD means. We know what a PGY1 means. We know what a PGY2 means. We know what a BCPS means. Now, there's some differences between those programs, but we know that if someone's a PharmD, PGY2 trained BCPS, like we know what that means. That cannot be said for the financial services industry. The word financial advisor in and of itself doesn't necessarily have a consistency of meaning. And so you as the consumer, therefore, have to do a lot more of the research. It's a fairly low bar of entry into the industry. And so, you know, credentials aren't required in the same way. You see a lot of different designation certifications. How people get paid is all over the map. And so my encouragement is to really just be asking good questions and making sure that you feel confident in that relationship. And if it doesn't feel transparent, it's probably not transparent, right? You really want to feel good about that decision. And especially if you're going to make an investment of time and money, you want to feel good that it's transparent and you know that all cards are on the table. So that would be the piece that I would add there. We've got about 5 minutes
I
left.
like to think about it as personal trainers. You
Mm,
can be a trainer with an online certificate and never lift a single weight or do a single class, or you can, you know, just proceed with caution. And I thought that was great advice. But the first time somebody told me about the trainers can get a printed certificate, it's like an emotional support animal. It's like proceed with caution.
Yeah, in the financial services industry, there's an exam called the Series 65, which takes probably 8 to 12 weeks to study for you, or I could pass it. You could register with the state, hang a shingle, call yourself a financial advisor. So that's kind of the low bar of entry. And then obviously it can go up from there. So you just gotta shop carefully and make sure you feel good about that engagement. Julia, I'll keep an eye on for any more questions. We got about 5 minutes left. So make sure for those that are here live, use this time to ask questions. I'll monitor the chat. You can use the Q&A feature. Julia, you want to go through the last couple slides you have? I'll do the giveaway and then we'll see what other questions come through.
Yeah, I think if there's anything you guys can take away from tonight, I hope you feel empowered. I hope you have new color to your money mindset. So you have the power to change how your money mindset works, and you now have some insight on some ideas and some ways to do it. If you'd like a handout to share with your partner, to share with your, group at work or something, there is a handout that you can download. We're going to share a link in the email along with the recording. You can grab a screenshot of that QR code. That'll take you straight to the Google Drive. No email required or anything crazy. It's just a resource for you to kind of sit and reflect. I know we dumped a lot of memory lane on you, and you might find that tomorrow more things come up, and that's okay. Thinking about them, talking about them is great. If you are interested in more about what I talk about and what I do, we only covered mindset. There are 6 pillars that I cover in the work that I do. I would love to have you join us for that journey together as we master money mindset and leave a legacy beyond wealth. Happy to share that in 2 weeks, we're going to go from mindset and heart into thinking and action. And we are going to talk about building generational wealth. How do we actually use a tool that I've designed that helps make decisions less emotional and more practical and more intentional? So yourfinancialpharmacist.com/build. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah, we're really excited for part two of that, and to build on, as the redirect suggest, to build on what we're talking about here this evening as well. So for this group, we'll hope you'll join us again. We'll be at the same time on April 11th, 8:30 p.m. Eastern, just like we did this session. We'll record it. We hope you can join live, but if not, we'll send the replay afterwards. So make sure that you register. Really excited for that part two. Let's go ahead and do the giveaway. So I have Mary Peters and Zoe Andy. Congratulations. I will reach out to both of you after the session here this evening. You should expect to see an email from me. If you don't, for whatever reason, make sure you reach out to us, info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com. Might mean that it ended up in spam or some other folder, but I'll be sending you an email here tonight just when we wrap up to make sure we can coordinate the logistics and details to get that giveaway over to you. So I don't see any other questions coming through. So Julia, just a huge thank you to you for taking up time on a Thursday evening, especially when a UNC basketball game is going on. I know you've got some UNC fans in the house. And so, yes, Mary Peters and Zoe Andy were the two giveaway winners. So, yes, thank you for so much for taking time. Really appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you again on April 11th. So have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for having me. Good night, everyone.
Take care.